Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Baum, and I'm the John and Mary Papajohn Director and CEO of the Des Moines Art Center. I would like to tell you how lucky you are, how lucky we are. We are lucky to be sitting in a magnificent building designed by one of the greatest architects of the 20th century, I.M. Pei. We are lucky to be inside of an extraordinary museum, one of the few art museums in Iowa and one of the best museums in the country. We are lucky, yes. We are lucky because we didn't have to pay admission, not even $1, to enter this auditorium. We are lucky to have incredible donors, trustees, and foundations who give so generously to the Art Center that we don't have to pay admission. Among them, the Principal Foundation and Art Bridges Access for All. We are lucky to count as one of those donors the wonderful, the committed, the highly opinionated Lois Fingerman. Yes, Lois. We love you, Lois. Lois endowed the Fingerman Lecture with her husband, Lou, in 1986, 39 years ago. So next year, 2026 will be the 40th anniversary of the Fingerman Lecture. We are lucky to have as a longtime steward of the Fingerman Lecture, Jill Featherstone, Senior Director of Museum Learning and Engagement. Jill is celebrating her 26th year at the Art Center on Saturday. And finally, we are exceptionally lucky to welcome the distinguished artist, Jeffrey Gibson, to Des Moines. Jeffrey's art, if you don't know of it already, is unforgettable. It's sensuous, tactile, poignant, delightful, serious, and powerful. His paintings, sculptures, and installations carry meaning in their every detail, from their colors and patterns to the materials from which they're made and the words that they carry. They are deeply affective, more than just vessels for meaning. They have a material impact on the mind, the soul, the body, and the senses. Jeffrey's art ranges across place, time, and culture. It is of the globe. It is deeply human. Of Cherokee descent, Jeffrey is a member of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. He grew up in Germany, South Korea, and the United States, studying at the art school, at the Art Institute, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Royal College of Art, London. The work for which he has become best known channels Cherokee and Choctaw traditions, sampling from both modernism and popular, especially queer culture. Jeffrey's work is joyful. It is also incisive. It is an art of power, perseverance, and political and personal liberation. Many of you are already familiar with Jeffrey through his pavilion at the 2024 Venice Biennale and his new commission, brand new commission as of a week, maybe 2 weeks, for the facade of the Met. If you haven't yet read about it in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, you should watch the video. You should also watch fascinating interview with Jeffrey that was published on CBS Sunday Morning in recognition of his project in Venice. So it is with excitement and gratitude for his time that I welcome Jeffrey Gibson to the stage.
Okay, good afternoon, or good evening, rather. Thank you so much for having me, and I want to say thank you to Jill and to Lois. Lois, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all of the work to bring me here today. I haven't done one of these talks in a while, I have to admit, so I'm going to kind of walk through a few different bodies of work. But I think if we can go ahead and bring the lights down, and then I'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, it's been a really busy, my gosh, 7, 8 years, and so I'm just at a point of trying to kind of slow things down a little bit and be in my studio and experiment more than I've been able to over the past few years. It won't look that way when I share with you what I've been up to. But I thought, one of the best places to start was looking back at some older pieces, for those of you who may not be familiar with what I do. There's been plenty of articles written about a number of times when I've nearly walked away from being an artist simply because I found it too overwhelming, very frustrating. I think the audience didn't always understand what it was I was trying to do. So I start here. This was an exhibition at Participant in New York City, which is an alternative art space. And I kind of considered this to be the last exhibition I was going to do. So I had worked with a number of artists in Oklahoma, Winnipeg, Oregon, and South Dakota to help me create pieces. This was a piece that I titled Flag, and it's me hand painting on it's a repurposed army blanket that I bought while I was living in France. And I would work on it at night in the basement and just kind of paint these sections in acrylic. And I brought it back and then installed it as a flag in the show. It was from there that Janelle Porter, who I'm still working with today, we co-edited the book An Indigenous Present in 2023. She organized my first museum exhibition at the ICA in Boston titled Love Song, and this is in 2013, where we installed Flag, and then these were newly commissioned works along the wall, which was a shift from me painting on canvas to painting on deer hide. So this is deer hide stretched over these parallelogram-shaped panels of wood. And I worked with a screen printer to just make 20 different compositions. And so they wrapped around the room, and then in the center here, this column of drums that are suspended also on rawhide. So they're rawhide drums that have been painted, and then they're kind of laced together in the back. I say this marked a really big difference for me because it was the first time I felt like audiences kind of understood what it was I was doing. And I think a lot of it had to do with the shift in materials to go on rawhide. So if I had done these exact same paintings on canvas, we wouldn't be talking about the 20 different animals in the room with us or the 25 different animals in the room with us. And up close, although they're really very much minimalist kind of compositions, flat color, transparent color, you can see the scars in the skin of the animal, you can see the hair follicles, you can see scrapes into it. And so it really shifted the position of the viewer. And so for me, that was kind of half the battle, was how do I get the viewer to look at the work differently than they might look at a painting on canvas, a modernist, geometric, abstract work on canvas. At this time, I knew 2015 I had moved upstate, so I was living in New York City up until 2010. Then I traveled around between San Francisco and France until 2012 when I moved to the Hudson Valley, which is where I still live, so about 2.5 hours north of New York City. I was starting a family, and so I started building a team to work with me. And so this is all beaded. This is all hand beaded. It's called square stitch, so it's just literally like weaving beads together. This is a quote by James Baldwin, and it says, "American history is longer, larger, more beautiful, more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it." And so this felt really, I guess for me at the time, I had been a fan of James Baldwin for a number of years at this point, but this really felt like, I don't know, somehow I had mixed all of the kind of cultural references that I was paying attention to into one object, and in particular, a kind of textile-based wall hanging. This is a quilt. I'm going to try just a little bit harder. The text enters the work about 2013. The first text was used on a punching bag, which we'll see a couple of the punching bags. And the words were just believe, believe, believe on the punching bag. And I've always used text in the titles of my work for, going back to the early 2000s. I've always really enjoyed it. I've always seen it as an extension of the artwork itself. But then I started thinking about how could I just make it more and more blatant. So not only the materials, but the text became a way for me just to kind of say it very clearly. The face in the center is actually deer hide stretched over cardboard that's been painted, and so it hangs on top of this quilt, and then the text is all hand appliqued on, and it's difficult to see here, but what looks like bells adorning are all thimbles. It's a collection of vintage thimbles. 2016, I just got my first kiln last year, so now I don't have to beg people to let me use their kilns. But working with these materials that are, you can find them within powwows, and there will be a section of the powwow where there are vendors who sell to the dancers who are making their own dance regalia. So I decided to start using those as my kind of art supply store. So I would go to powwows, look at dancers, study their regalia, go through the vendors and buy materials. So there's beads, there's studs, there's fringe, there's fabrics, there's jingles. The head, these are some of the first ceramic heads that I made, which you'll see show up again later, and I'm still continuing to make them. The wood, I source around where I live. I live right along the Hudson River, so we just go down to the banks and we pull wood out of the banks. And then these are teepee poles that you see poking out in the front. So I'm really just kind of looking for like, how can I use these materials to make these forms? And I think I've always been interested in different kinds of indigenous ceramics in particular and drawings where you might find them petroglyphs or you might find them on stones, paintings, where we're not 100% sure if they're describing an animal, a spirit, a human transforming. There's all different kinds of interpretations of what those drawings are. So I started thinking about these kind of anthropomorphic, kind of humanoid animal forms. And that has continued in the work and eventually led to the Met sculptures. This piece, this in the center here is an entire deer hide, which has been painted, and it's attached to the surface of a wood panel. And then these are all upholstery tacks, which kind of go around the perimeter of it. And playing with text, and Sister Corita Kent, if you're familiar with her work, is someone who used, she was a nun who used text, biblical scripture, and found kind of pop cultural text. And she would use color to kind of pull out different parts of the phrase. So here I know you have a lot of strength left, and if you separate the color, I have strength left. And so this was a pretty significant piece for me, because hide, if you've ever worked with it, it has a mind of its own. It continues to be very active. It never really becomes completely dormant. And by that I mean it literally shifts shape and moves with temperature and humidity. This piece here, Say My Name, from 2018. So this was a mix of, this was also kind of a shift with the fringe on the sides. This is a nylon fringe, which would usually be on the ends of a dance shawl. The base layer of this is a trading post blanket. For me, I think, growing up kind of being like, well, what were Native people making during the late 19th going into the 20th century? Trading posts became an interesting place because it's where trading post owners would tell Native makers what was popular, what sold, what patterns sold, what colors sold. And so I really love that trading post blankets represent makers using their skills commercially to kind of exist within a marketplace. And also it's not something that was used for ceremony or something that was culturally meant to be kept within the community. The text on here, I don't know how well you can read it, but down the center is all hand-beaded, different non-binary gender terms. And then on the sides, it says, say my name, which is, gosh, now I'm totally spacing. What's the name of the band that Beyonce was in? Huh? Yeah, just thank you. And then who I reference many times is Sylvester. So You Make Me Feel Mighty Real is the top and the bottom. So I think for me, I draw lyrics and words from sermons, from speeches, from poems, from pop music. I write some myself, and I just keep an ongoing running text that's probably about 7 or 8 years old at this point, that when it's time for me to start titling things, I start going back through my text and reading. So these were done in 2019, and this idea of working on my own kind of, I guess, regalia, thinking about what people wear, what's the difference between something we might see in a museum collection and the way that we think about fashion or clothes that we wear today, and trying to create things that were a mixture of materials that may have never existed and may never really exist for any other reason other than a work of art. So the fabric I design, I print, it's embedded with images and patterns. This is basketry reed. This is the kind of reed that Choctaws would make baskets from. It's river cane. We stitch it together, and then everything is grommeted and beaded, and then they're hung on teepee poles. This was from the first series of garments in 2019, and I believe this is the one which is currently on view in Lynn Cook's exhibition, Woven Histories. Which is kind of amazing because you never know where your work's going to end up. But I certainly didn't think this piece, when I made it, would end up at MoMA. This is a screen print on a drum. So it's an actual deer hide drum that has been screen printed. We worked with a press in Wisconsin, who I'm forgetting their name right now. Tandem, thank you. Tandem Press, who can literally do anything. They're an incredible press, and so they were very excited to figure out how to do screen prints on drums. And the shapes around the perimeter mark the different times of the moon, and then the color and this kind of energy band of waves that kind of come through the center. So this was an addition. And we've made a few drum editions. This is one of the first figures. This is quite small. He's maybe only about 22 inches tall. He's made from glass beads. He's made from citrine. He's made from aquamarine stone and a green quartz. I think the figurative side, and especially leading up to the Met, was kind of something that I've played with. I generally identify as an abstract artist, but the figure kind of comes in and out every now and again. And this does use Choctaw language to describe it. And it's not that often that I use Choctaw or Cherokee language to describe things, but when I do, it tends to be very, very literal. They don't tend to be poetic. I think it's more about the translation of the language. This is another wall hanging, It Can Be Said of Them, which is a direct reference to a Sister Carita print where she was referring, I believe, a New York Times article, which was about civil rights leaders at the time. And the beginning, or within the article, she says, "It can be said of them," which is another reference to another writer. So the way that language kind of moves around between circumstances and meaning shifts, depending on who said it, when it was said, who it was said to, is really important to me. So it can be said of them. I try to choose language where the viewer is kind of left with the question of, well, what is it, and what was said, and who is them? And so you have to kind of make a decision by saying it where you kind of sit within this equation. Here's a punching bag. So this is from 2019. The very first punching bag was made in 2011 to 2013, shown in 2013. And by this point, I like to say now we can do anything. They're perfect. We know how to make everything that we want to make. This one I really love because the top is beaded, and the text is playing with fire. I believe this is in the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And then there are jingles, which are stacked in a way. Normally you would see jingles on a jingle dress dancer's dress in a powwow arena, or people consider the dance ceremonial. It's a gendered dance, which is about healing, but you'd never see them stacked like this. You would never see fringe this dense, and certainly you would never see it cut into these geometric shapes. So I do work with a studio team. Right now we're about 15. And when we're making these, like the laser levels come out and everything's like perfectly trimmed and people are making sure that these lines read really straight. But for me, the punching bag, from the very beginning, you know, they're always about power. They're always about something getting hit or someone doing the hitting or some kind of exercising or, you know, cathartic action about getting anger out of your body, which is how I was introduced to boxing initially. And I'm not an avid boxer. It was through therapy that someone led me to work with a physical trainer, and they introduced me to boxing. But there was something about dressing this bag which really diffuses the desire to hit it. And that came from my experience of working with traditionalists who were making their own regalia, wearing their own regalia daily, in a way that just commanded a degree of respect that I wanted to bring to an inanimate object. So this idea of materials and how you would normally see them, the De Cordova Museum outside of Boston asked me to do an installation, and I wanted to, you know, I knew I wanted to work with fringe, and I was watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. I had never watched it my entire life, and so you all know that scene where this perfect object sits in and it represents the future and modernism, and I thought, well, that's not the future that I want to live in. I don't want to live in a perfect shaped, untouched, without human hands space. So I wanted to think about how to take something like a textile, which is oftentimes not associated with kind of future and modernity, but to think about how to soften it, but also keep its kind of firm shape. So these three fringe cubes emerged that kind of hover above, and you can see their scale. This is another one of those things that felt crazy to think, let's make these 12-foot tall fringe cubes. But we did, and it's all mathematics, and these are the colors of fringe that are available. And yeah, I really love this piece. And I love the way that when you walk amongst them, they kind of break all the straight lines. Just the movement of your body is enough to kind of make them move just a little bit. And you find people blowing on them and kind of walking by faster to try to get them to move. This was also in that show. This is a work on paper. You're probably seeing it. It's probably actually about 75% of the scale. And this does incorporate some historic beadwork pieces. So the flower in the upper left there is actually the front of a bag, another trading post object. There's beadwork actually into the paper. There's a lot of heavy collage. So when I work on paper, you know, we work with photography, and I keep everything, and so I have painted pieces of paper going back to the early 2000s that I still have boxes of. And when I work on paper, which is primarily what I do independently, I get to go pull out these boxes and just start collaging. So at this point, I really do consider myself a collage artist, meaning that whether it's sound or garments or textiles or paper or paintings, it's really about taking a piece of this and putting it next to a piece of that and then cutting it again and remixing it with something else and turning it around. So I was invited to the Portland Art Museum in 2022. These were where the monuments had been pulled down off of these pedestals. I believe this was on top of where Abraham Lincoln's monument was pulled down. And I had invited members of the Native community to come and be photographed. And this sits out right outside of the museum. And so we were looking for a site to photograph people. And we had 1 day to photograph. No, 2 days. We had 2 days to photograph. We invited people. Oftentimes I'll do projects with the public, with volunteers. And I didn't tell people what to wear. I said, come and present yourself as you want the world to see you. And so we shot, I think, 117 images over the course of those 2 days. And so these are just 3 of them. But people really surprised me. And in particular, Indigenous community members of the LGBTQ plus community there came and were really vulnerable to put themselves in these photographs. We gave everybody a copy of the photograph, and so we have this amazing archive of these 117 people, some of whom have passed on at this point and chose to have this image be their final image that was shown of them at their memorial. So it was a really, really special project where I do oftentimes like to give over to not really knowing what's going to happen. You know, if we had 5 people show up, we would have made that work. But we had a tremendous amount of people calling and scheduling. Ultimately, this is the installation that it became. So that back wall is entirely covered with those photographs. And then these are glass panels that I worked on with Bullseye, which are all fused glass that have different texts in there. And then we had theatrical lights that shot through the glass and projected all of that onto the photographs. Here's another garment. And the garments, just to be clear, this one is probably about 10 feet tall. So they're oversized to begin with. This is a very recent one. But they're big on me. And I have had people wear them. I photographed people in them. I have worn them myself. I shot a video this past year where I wore all the garments in the Mass MoCA exhibition and moved, did a series of movements that show up in a video. And they're so huge that when you move, like in order for me to move from here to the other side of the room, I would need to ask for help. It's impossible to move by myself in one of the garments. Sometimes they weigh up to 100 pounds. So just, they're really meant to, when you wear them, make you very conscious of your own body and make you very conscious of how you have to move your body, what you have to do to gather the strength to move within them. This is a painting from 2023, and this also incorporates, at the top there, that is a hair barrette, and at the bottom, I believe, is another hair barrette, right in the center there. Otherwise, these are acrylic on canvas panel, and the text is deep at the center of your being. And then we worked with an automotive paint finisher who was able to give us this incredible gradient of the frame. These birds. The birds really originate with a turn-of-the-century form that was made by Tuscarora people at the Niagara Falls region, and they were trying to use a traditional form of beadwork to appeal to Victorian tastes. Ultimately, what they made became known as a whimsy, and it wasn't either native enough to be valuable, and it wasn't non-native enough to be valuable. So they became like tourist novelties that were sold very cheaply. I came across them in my 20s at the Field Museum in Chicago, and they just immediately spoke to me as this kind of form that sits somewhere in between things. We still make them. They take a long time to make. There are a lot of ways that I get to experiment with different kinds of beadwork. So these are all hand beaded in the studio. Everything happens in the building. I prefer it that way because I don't always know what the end artwork is going to look like. I only can like map out a starting point. We get through the starting point, I'll come in and take a look, and we kind of make decisions about what happens next. But these are only about sort of this big. Okay, so Venice. So I don't know if, Venice, I saw, it's kind of a strange thing. It's like you have an idea, you apply, you suddenly get this call, and then you're in a marathon. And so I'm just coming out of the marathon, but it's an intense amount of work. It's one of the wildest things I'll ever do. And I had an amazing team. I'll start with the title, The Space in Which to Place Me, is a line from a Laley Long Soldier poem, who is a Lakota poet, who I've long admired, and I knew I wanted to bring in as many Indigenous and Native people to work with me on the exhibition. So I called her up, and she was very open to letting me use her words. This is what we had done to the pavilion. So if you've seen the pavilion before an artist addresses it, it looks like a Jeffersonian kind of neoclassical building, which is very, of its era. It was built in the 40s, late 30s, early 40s, and so I knew I wanted to radically change the building. So everything, it's a historic building, so you can't actually touch it. Everything has to be made so that it kind of sits around it. So you end up working with engineers, architects, the whole building had to be scanned. It's an old building. There's very few perfectly right angles any longer, so you have to make everything just a millimeter this way and a millimeter that way. There was no disability ramp, so we worked with someone to build what I think is you have to also return it, so none of this exists anymore, but you have to return it. But we built this, what I think is a really incredible kind of additional courtyard for disability access, and then placed this sculpture in the center. The flags that you see here, unfortunately you couldn't really read them, but this is one of the flags. One becomes the other. And so there's 8 flags, which ultimately became 8 buttons, and Lois has one on tonight. Here's another one, powerful because we're different. And these were shown again also at the Broad in Los Angeles most recently. So this was opening day, and I remember, again, I'm just getting lists of here's what's gonna happen today. This was the press conference, and I said, well, how many people are we expecting? And they said, oh, usually about 60 to 70. And we had 300. We had 300 people show up. And I knew from day one in our proposal that I wanted dancers to take over this central sculpture, which ultimately was also open to the public to activate in whatever they wanted to. So if we can play the video, we'll get to see. So there's a longer video online if you want to see the full, I think it's probably about 2 minutes. You know, what's interesting is I wanted to make sure that we created as many images and collect as much imagery as possible of Indigenous people brought in by invitation to Venice. Much of the historical imagery of Native and Indigenous people in Europe is where they were brought under duress, where they were brought without their choice. Also, their home communities were being destroyed at the time that they were there. A lot of the photographs are being told what to wear, they're being told how to pose. So one of my goals was just to generate as much content as we possibly could. And I know I haven't even seen 1/10 of what we collected, but we asked all of the dancers also to share their photography with us. There's a beautiful catalog which has just been released, which I think does an incredible job. So this was the first gallery that you walk into, and the mural on the back is hand-painted. We hand-painted it in New Mexico, and then it was installed here directly on the wall. We really changed the space from beginning to end. These are 2 figures that I knew I wanted to greet people. All of their text has all of their garments have different kinds of text embedded in the beadwork. The one on the right says we want to be free and talks about the first Native American Citizenship Act, and on the right is titled, on the left is titled The Enforcer. And the heads are ceramic, and you can see where the fringe really makes up the garment. And I wanted very much the garments to act as the sculpture. This is the second gallery that you go into. These are 2 of the beaded birds that we are actually, they're installed inside of stone that we sourced in Italy. The murals are all hand-painted. There are canvas paintings on the wall. And on the left, We Are Witnesses by the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow is the title. And if there is no struggle, there is no progress. And this is from Frederick Douglass. And embedded in the mural, it says, birds flying high, you know how I feel. That's what goes across in the top and the bottom of the mural. Here's a very small piece, which is kind of similar to the one that is now here in the collection. I do collect buttons. They find their way into all sorts of things, but if not now, then when? This is just a small, sweet little work on paper. The center of the building has this rotunda, and it's interesting when you look back at the different installations in the pavilion, how artists have handled the rotunda at different times. Simone had a singular sculpture. Mark Bradford did a kind of fully immersive installation. And I knew I wanted to have one punching bag. And this says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And the fringe here is much longer, and it falls and sits on the floor in these 4 cardinal direction colors. This piece is going into the National Gallery collection and will be installed, fingers crossed, next year. This is a painting in one of the next galleries, and the title of this is quite a large painting. I want to say the canvas is probably about 84 inches tall, and then probably 94 with this beaded frame. So the frame around it is fully beaded. And the title that's in there says, "The returned male student far too frequently goes back to the reservation and falls into the old custom of letting his hair grow long." And this was a direct quote from a letter written by the Commissioner of Indian Affairs to the superintendent of the school district in 1902. And unfortunately, this was still happening. There are still, within school systems where a native male might be assaulted and have his hair cut short as a form of bullying, a form of intimidation, and also cultural appropriation. So my goal with the pavilion was to try to reflect different moments within American history. I didn't want it to be entirely about Indigenous histories, and I feel really very proud of what we accomplished. It was a huge undertaking. We had a number of educational initiatives which are still ongoing. We did the catalog, we did a symposium, we brought the Institute of American Indian Arts, their MFA program, over. We were extremely ambitious, and I often say that artists, we get used to being told no a lot. This was just for various reasons, but this was one of those moments where people just kept saying yes. And so it became ballooned into a huge, huge project. This sculpture here refers to its title, "The Space in Which to Place Me," and it's an amalgamation of different, a classical, kind of pedestals for different kinds of monuments. And it's meant to function as a speaker's corner, and we did open it up to the public to climb on, play on, perform on, use it as a speaker's corner in your own language, and we had a number of people do that throughout the run of the exhibition. This is one of the works on paper, and this is a beaded belt in the center, the floral beaded belt. This is another work on paper, "The Right of the People Peaceably to Assemble." And here's some of the images that we collected. The dancers came over. We had about 30 dancers and drummers and singers come over from all different parts of the country. I want to say we had about 200 people respond wanting to come, but then it became a question about who could come, whose schedule worked for it, who had a passport, that sort of stuff. So we had this incredible group of people come and join us for a couple of weeks, and it was really fantastic. And all of their regalia is theirs, different kinds of dancers, and a couple of families came. And this is a clip of the video that was at the end. And this video was made in 2020. It was commissioned by the Times Square Arts in New York City and took over about 80 of the monitors in Times Square. And for institutions, we put it into a 9-channel projection. So we can go ahead and play the video here. So the total video is 2 minutes and 50, thank you. The total video is 2 minutes and 57 seconds, and it debuted in Times Square on March 7th. So that was literally the weekend that we went into lockdown. And so it ended up being up, it was supposed to be up for 1 month, it ended up being up for 9 months. And it would happen every night at 11:57. The video comes on, and it was pretty great. So this is an acclaimed jingle dress dancer, Sarah Ortegon High Walking, and she and I have worked on a number of projects together. But this is a healing dance, which it's titled "She Never Dances Alone," and it's meant to be a dance that calls your ancestors for protection. And so the idea of her kind of multiplying and then returning back into one is what you see throughout the 2 minutes and 57 seconds. So this, Powerful Because We're Different, is an exhibition that Denise Marconish at MoMA invited me to do 6 years ago. And then COVID happened, threw all of our schedules off. And so then Venice happened, and then ultimately we opened about a year ago. It'll be up for another about 11 months. MoMA has a space which is 18,000 square feet. And so it's another kind of commission that when they invite you, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, like I have to activate 18,000 square feet. I love where we arrived. It kind of is where we started from. Right in the center of the 5 screens, is a documentary from 1991 titled Two-Spirit People. And it basically is an interview and documentary made in 1991 of LGBTQ Indigenous members of the Bay Area community. I was thrilled to find it because that's when the term emerges. The term Two-Spirit emerges in 1991. And so I remember being in college and somebody asking me if I was Two-Spirit, and at the time I said no. And I still don't necessarily identify as Two-Spirit, but this was like, when you look at Native American history, there's so many gaps about what we don't know what happened between this event and that event. And most of the events we know tend to be kind of generalized, very few individual voices. And here we have this chance of 35 years to speak to people who have lived through this. And so that was kind of the goal. We reached out to a number of queer Indigenous content makers on different social media platforms to contribute to the 4 other screens. And then I worked with a video editor in Hawaii and a DJ and sound engineer to make the soundtrack. These are new garments that I made specifically for MoMA. This is what we call the dark side. So there's kind of like a house track that we put together of sound bites. And then we made these dance floors. So these dance floors are glass and they light up from underneath. So really, there's 4 artworks in here, the 5-screen video projection or monitors, and then each of the garments with their dance floor. And then we did a mural in mirrored plexi in the back. So you go through a 60-foot tunnel, and when you come out on the other side, this is the other side. So then suddenly you're kind of out into the light. And I wanted to kind of recreate what it was like to be in gay clubs in the late 80s and early 90s, of being in a kind of dark space with strangers where you feel kind of like maybe more free to be yourself. And then suddenly there's this space where you're kind of like waiting to go to the bathroom in a hallway and you could just feel the bass coming through the walls. And then you go to the other side and it's like 4 a.m. and you're like, oh my gosh, there's another world outside. So, and it's funny how many people who are kind of my age who have described it just that way. They're like, oh, it just took me back. And so we've done dance parties in here. We've had DJs. We've had activators. I think in total we've involved about 45 individuals contributing content for me to work with to make this exhibition. And the garments are huge. So they might look wearable here, but they're really 10 to 12 feet tall. And then I was going to offer, and I have offered for people to wear them, but I'm 6'2" if I stand up straight, and so I decided to wear them, partially because I'm not really a performer. I used to perform in my own performances, then I started working with people, and I'm 53, and I thought, wow, there's a difference between a body when you're 53 than when you're 43 or 33 or 23. So I decided to wear them myself. And we'll see in a second. This is looking back. So that on the right is the beginning of the tunnel from the light side that will take you to the darker side. So this video is me, which was shot probably about a year ago and edited. It's a 21-minute video of me moving to both sound that I've made, but wearing the garments that you've just seen as you're coming through the exhibition space. So, the Met. You know, Jane Panetta, who is the curator that I worked with, we've known each other for 15 years. David Breslin and I have known each other not quite as well for probably about 8 to 10 years. And so when David called me, it was very casual. He said, I want to talk to you about something. And I thought he was going to invite me to do a rooftop project. And then he said, you know, we're talking about who we'd like to see do the facade sculptures, and your name keeps coming up, and we wanted to see if you were interested. And I think I said yes to him immediately. And I had been working with the foundry UAP, who is a bronze aluminum foundry, steel foundry, about an hour and 15 minutes from my house. They had asked me to come and start experimenting with them about 4 years previously. And I primarily work with textiles, right, and beads and kind of small things that you collage together to make bigger things. So we hadn't really figured out what would make sense for me in terms of making like a large sculpture. It was sort of frightening to me to think about what that would look like. These are the maquettes. So the maquettes were made from clay, blue foam. The legs are all made from driftwood that I pulled out of the river. Ultimately, we knew that at the foundry, they do a lot of digital sculpting. So some things only had to hold the form that we could continue working on digitally. We made the bases so that we knew that they would fit inside of the niches. There's a lot of engineering that happens. Figuring them out, I chose 4 animals that I'm familiar with because they exist in the Hudson Valley. So a deer, a coyote, a squirrel, and a hawk. I realized later I have a medicine deck of tarot cards that I've used since my 20s, and they're amazing. I don't know how they sort my life out daily, but they do. And so I decided to look at these, and then I remembered the title, "The Animal That Therefore I Am," comes from a series of lectures by Jacques Derrida in 1997, where he's really talking about our relationship to animals and how our culture has been formed to make them live within our world as opposed to seeing them equitably or acknowledging their kind of own integrity. So the book is very much about our cultural loss of empathy, and through the loss of empathy, we open up for a form of violence. And so I started looking at animals as like, well, what can they teach me? Which is really what this power deck is about, this medicine deck is about. So then I decided to use the language of Choctaw and then Cherokee and then use the word. And so the whole title is They Teach Us to Be Sensitive and to Trust Our Instincts, Isi Awi Deer. And then that's how the whole title will work going across. Working on them at the foundry is a very long process. Many of them are digitally finished. They're cut up into about 30 different sections and then have to be reassembled. And then they have to be reworked. And then all the patina happens. And so this amount of color is unusual. But the amount of detail that the foundry was able to capture, because I didn't want things that felt so static, and I didn't want animals that felt like they were trophies. I wanted animals to feel like they could kind of be watching us, or they could kind of turn the gaze between the viewer and the animal. So you can see here as they're coming together. And whether you're working with a printmaker, a master printmaker, or you're working with someone who's creating a sculpture with you, you really have to figure out your relationship and what's the best way to communicate. A lot of times I was taking photos of things and we would write them up with notes, and then we would do additional samples and come back. But this was in the last week, so this is really as we're like, you can't really make any more changes. You're kind of locked in. Here's what they look like on the facade. And I couldn't be happier, to be honest. I was there when they were installed on the morning, and you really have no choice. You know, you hope you got it all right because there's no second chances at this point. But I really have been really overwhelmed with the response. You know, it's New York City, and you never know if New York City is going to embrace you or spit you out. This has been an incredible embrace, so thank you. And I think that's our last slide. So I don't know how I'm in time, but.
We would have loved it had there been more slides, but we can also open it up to some questions now. Per usual, there's a mic on either side of the audience here. We have Caleb over there, and I'm over here, and you can raise your hand, and we will pass a mic into you. And Paul, if we can get the house raised a little bit, house lights. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Beautiful work. I grew up in Chicago. I must ask, when you said you saw something at age 7, 8 at the Field Museum, did you grow up there? Or?
Oh, no. By the time I was in Chicago, it was 1992. So I was 20. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's okay. I was there from 1992 to 1996. Yep.
Go ahead and raise your hand. We'll just pass the mic down.
I'm very fascinated about this idea of you being a collage artist, and I was noticing how you brought traditional historic elements into modern day and then imposed and infused language with it. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, did the language drive the art, or did the art drive the language more that you chose to
That's a really good question.
bring together with it?
You know, it's interesting because I think as an artist, I'm sure there's many artists here in the audience, you start making in such a humble place, and you, just like anything else, you think it might become this or it might become that, and then it doesn't become this or that, you know, and then at some point, I think when the language came in, it probably came in out of frustration of wanting to just be as blatant as I possibly could. And I think 10 years previous to that, if someone had said, you're going to start using language in the way that I do, I would have said, absolutely not. Because to me at the time, language felt so fixed, and like it didn't allow for this kind of space of interchangeability and play. But truthfully, you know, language is it's just so slippery. You know, it's not very fixed. I think even when we think it is. So now it's really kind of integrated itself. There are, in fact, I'm opening a show in October in Paris, and there is no text. And I questioned whether I wanted to bring text in or not. I did put it in the titles, but they're very literal titles. They don't offer any real poetry to them. So I think at this point, now I have a relationship with text. You know, writing hasn't gotten any easier. Like, for me to draft something myself hasn't gotten any easier. But I think now it's a part of the practice. Like, words, meaning, translation, it's all a part of the practice. So now I still make the work first without thinking about words. I'm very intuitive, very process-oriented. And about 2/3 of the way, I might take the time to kind of like look at what's going on. You know, I might pull out 7 to 10 pieces and just put them around me and sit there and like what do I see happening in the work? And then the language starts coming in.
I just want to say, looking at it, I got the sense of the history and the really unique and idealistic, playful, joyful way you bring it together. And the words kind of gave me a sense of something in the future, too.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that because it was ambiguous, yet it leaves something open in your pieces, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That is important to me, actually.
I'm also interested in the text as well. So with the text-based pieces, do you intend to place text in those parts of the painting early on? Because the text really serves the form and the structure of your paintings as well.
Yeah. There's been different times. There's been times when, I mean, it's kind of funny having a practice that's so broad, you know, because now I feel like I can kind of pick and choose. There's like a really big a la carte menu at this point. So for instance, like when I've done, which I didn't show today, but I did a performance with 50 volunteers that I wrote the text for all 50 garments, where it's printed on the garment, it's screen printed on the drum. And I really thought about it as like the text was like a name. So it was so central. Other times, one time I remember I did a beadwork piece and I thought the piece was a failure because you could barely read the text because of the way the color didn't sit apart from what was around it. And a very traditional beadworker came up to me who was like, she was like in her maybe late 70s, early 80s, and just thought it was the most brilliant thing. And she just said, the fact that it's like embedded in there and it's not separate, you didn't make the pattern the background, it's kind of like totally integrated. So that was a real lesson for me that, you know, the text doesn't always, it can be structural, it can be compositional. Sometimes, I have actually been using my own handwriting lately. So the piece that's here in the collection uses my own handwriting, which is a different kind of text. Working with a graphic designer, he riffed off of my different kinds of text and kind of opened it up to lots of different graphic possibilities. So now it's like a whole thing. Like we just did a tattoo. It's like a whole, yeah, it's gonna be weird to see somebody wearing my letter forms on them. So, but you know, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I just want to first shout out and appreciate the kaleidoscopic nature of a lot of your work. I just remember
Thank you.
kaleidoscopes when I was a kid, and I could get lost in them. So I really appreciated that. And I also appreciated the sort of throwback, but also futuristic choice in the lettering that you use, the stylized lettering. If you want to speak to those, cool, but I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So the question is, I want to thank the woman for the question about language, because was the first half of my question. The second half is that you used the words, I was frustrated 3 times, I counted.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm really curious about what was the frustration or the context of the frustration or the literal frustration? What was happening that caused you to be so frustrated to want to then be blatant? What was it that was missing or that wasn't working for you in whether it's the relationship with the audience, with the art itself, or whatever that was? Could you speak to your frustrations?
Yeah, I mean, going back to 90, so I went to the Art Institute of Chicago in 93, I believe, is when I started. So 93, 94, 95. And, you know, so I'm studying painting. They were not introducing me to Native American artists. And so I felt like, and it wasn't so much that I was craving to meet other Native American artists as much as I wanted to learn how I was thinking about my own work, right? These kind of cultural narratives. Then when I worked at the Field Museum and I had a couple of Native American mentors who would walk me through the collections and share with me what it was we were looking at. So things like beading, weaving, textiles, pattern. This is where I was kind of drawing information from. Then I would go to the Art Institute and suddenly it's just triangles, it's just color. Like you don't have to give it this big story. Like no one's gonna know that. So the frustration was really, I think, when I was showing those paintings initially, and this is going back to like 2000 to 2006. When I would show paintings, I was getting appreciation from people who were just like, I love the color, I love the pattern, and then, you know, tell me more about it, and I would talk about it, and I could just see their eyes glaze over, you know? It was like, I didn't need all that. Like, I'm fine. And that was the frustrating part, because I really felt like that narrative is so important to me, and was really important for me to develop my own language as an artist. And so you need someone to have that conversation with, and I wasn't finding it. So I think that was really the frustration. And then ultimately just realizing I had to kind of do it on my own. And at this point now I do have people, but I'm also, you know, I've been doing this for a while, so now I'm also a voice that is sharing that back with not only Native artists, but other artists as well. Yeah.
That was a great question. And Jeffrey, thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a question? What are you wondering about? Yep, I'm coming down.
Yeah, don't be nervous. I'm happy to talk about anything.
Could you speak to the way that you work with 15 assistants in your studio and how you maintain your connection to yourself and your work and your voice with all of these people around you?
Well, part of it is I knew I wanted to have a family very early on. So I think everyone I interviewed, I started off by saying like, so look, I'm planning on having a family and I can't be a crazy artist working 24/7. My intention is to have a work day. I'm gonna come in between 9:30 and 10. I'm gonna leave at 5. I'm not working weekends. And I haven't done that for 20 years. And I started doing that before I was having any real success. When I first started working with institutions and they would give me a budget, I would always budget in some assistance. I think, the hardest part has been the handover of trust, right? And so artists were used to wearing 30 hats, doing every single thing, and struggling to find time just to be creative or to experiment, right? And so I think I had a wonderful mentor. Her name is Colleen Keegan. She's still in my life. And she teaches a class at Wharton Business School, which is just about how businesses divide finances and time to accomplish your goal. And she loves to say, you can build a Fortune 100 company, you can rob a bank. Like, whatever I'm going to teach you, use it as you wish. And so I think, I've had some people with me now for 14 years. I have my production manager has been with me now for coming up on 11 years. We're all in one building. This is why I like having people in one building. And, I've been broke. I've been nearly bankrupt. I have had the IRS lock my accounts. I've had lots of crazy things. But even as things became more sustainable, I continued pouring everything back into the studio. And so the value of me being able to have a personal life and step away and come back in. And the biggest thing was really, I think where I'm most useful right now in the studio is in a space where I'm by myself, I'm pouring paint, I'm doing drawings, I'm generating ideas. And then I go into the other part of the studio where people are working on things, and I can just sort of immediately see, we have now a history, certainly since 2012, when Jenny, my production manager, started. They have kept everything, every drawing, every email. They've been putting them in those like filing boxes. And so now we have a studio memory. People are not replaceable in the way that they were in year 1 and 2. So we sit down and we talk about, like, remember that piece we did in, 2017? And we'll talk about really how much better we've gotten. And I love whenever I say it to Jenny, I say, I'll draw something and I'll say, do you think we can do this? And they always look at me and they go, we can do anything. And I was like, amazing. So trust, I tremendously trust them. That period, which now I would say I'm through, of building trust, bringing people in to help you make things. In the beginning, I used to tell them, I don't pay you enough for you to have to use your creative brain here. We try to set it up so that whatever you do while you're here, drop it at the door when you leave, go home and do your own thing. I only like to hire people full-time. And so over the years, we've gone from 4 people up to 10, up to 12, during Venice up to 21, and now we're back down to 15. So I don't know if that helps, but I have 2 studio managers. I have one who manages day-to-day operations of the studio and is an artist, and I have the other one who is not an artist, but who's more outward-facing and manages communications and things like that, making sure that, or helped Jill organize all of this. I have a painting manager, I have a production manager, and I have one person who focuses on ceramics. And in 2016, I purchased a turn-of-the-century schoolhouse that had an extension in the 60s and the 70s. So we have 13 classrooms. And so there's like the beading room, the sewing room, the gym is the painting studio, and then we have offices. We have a shop, and that would not have been possible in the city. That was definitely a move upstate possibility.
Wonderful. And Caleb, do you have someone with the mic on your side, or I didn't know if it was out
Right.
already?
And one other thing, always pay your taxes. Yeah.
I see. Yep, I see the question down here, and then I see you, and then we'll wrap things up. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you talk to your choice for scale, like the giant garments, and why you choose to do things as big as large as you do?
Trying to think with the garments. I think well, I guess I'll answer it this way, because this is not something I knew going back, for instance. But I have fallen in love with the complete impracticality of art making. Meaning that I think if you're trying to make things that sell, or if you're trying to make things that are practical or concerned how they're going to fit into somebody's home, you're probably not going to be making the best work that you're capable of making. So you have to lift all that off and just sort of go with, like, what is it you want to see in the world? I think with the garments, so much of it was about my body initially, and kind of what it's like to be a large person moving through the world and wanting a garment which kind of made me feel small. So it was always based on my body. And so now the garments, when we put them on other people, they're like, how do you move in this? And I'm like, oh, it's because I can lift, 30 pounds on each arm, and I can swing my arm. So I think it was a lot about the physicality, and there's some, major, I don't know if you're familiar with the Magdalena Abenakowitz kind of woven garments. Those as sculptures were some of the biggest influences on me. Just the how much I am so fascinated by why somebody would make something which, it exceeds its utility purpose. There's something about the concept of it that it's not about the kind of utility that we think about a garment being. So I think that's part of it. With the Met sculptures, I didn't want them seated back into the niches. I knew I wanted them leaning out of the niches. And I actually looked at the Wangechi Mutu sculptures, which I think were one of the most successful installations that I saw. And I judged mine off of the scale of hers, but hers were set back into the niches. And then so mine sit right on the front. So we arrived at 10 foot. And then everything was scaled to fit within the columns. And then sometimes I just say, you got to take up space, Yeah.
In regards to the text with each of the niche statues, watching you speak about your work and seeing the visuals of your work, I can see each of these things play out in your work, but I'm wondering what your relationship is with each of these statements and how they are incorporated into you as a person.
Well, I think, it's funny, last week, well, no, not last week, yeah, last week, because I was at a conference on Tuesday, which was for Climate Week in New York City. And I think I've been invited, I am an educator for more than 25 years, and we talk a lot about climate, we talk a lot about carbon imprints and, just general crises facing us collectively as humans. I think that originally, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was talking a lot about indigenous kinship philosophies, which is basically seeing every living thing as an extension of our own bodies, the planet as an extension of our body, every animal, every tree. I did a project with a geologist back in 2022, and we were talking about dinosaurs. I was fascinated by dinosaurs, and he said, well, we all have dinosaur DNA in our bones, right? And I was like, what? He was like, yeah. He was like, every living thing shows up in every other living thing in some way, just scientifically. And he said, yeah, humans are one of the most successful species to have survived. You know, he's like, we exist at the very end of these branches that have survived the growth, right? And so I think that has kind of pushed me to think about what I can do as an artist in thinking about these much larger ideas, right? And animals, in the way that I've said the terms Native American and Indigenous are very flattening to the hundreds of distinct tribes in the world, right? So we're not learning about the different tribes within each part of the world. We're just learning this term right now. Animals is the same way. Animals is a flattening term for thousands of species, and for also a way that we separate ourselves because we don't see ourselves as an animal. So the book, The Animal That Therefore I Am, even in the title, is really very much about reintegrating oneself into the world of nature and what we look at as animals. So I think these 4 animals I chose simply because the squirrel is so ubiquitous with urban environments and has actually thrived off of our waste. Coyotes, I didn't know when we started, but I don't know if any of you saw, there was a New York Times article about a pack of coyotes that lives in Central Park and are doing quite well. Deer, where I live right now, the deer, they run the show. Like, we're relative to what they do. And hawks, we have an island near where I live with thousands of hawks that reside there. But when my children were born, we wanted to give them animal names of some sort. And all of the suggested names for females are all sort of like baby, pretty animals, like non-aggressive. And so we were like, she's a hawk. So her middle name is Hawk. And so that's how I chose these 4. But ultimately now I realize we could go on. We could just, there's tons of incredible animals.
Well, everyone, and to bookend the way Kelly opened up the remarks tonight, we are so lucky to have had you speak with us for over an hour.
Thank you.
And we are equally lucky to have all of you here, our wonderful arts community. Thank you for supporting what we do, and we are really grateful to you as well. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Jeffrey.
coming tonight.